Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out again with my friend Caleb Maupin, who's up in New York City. All kinds of craziness going on, and Caleb's got a plan for all of it. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and we are hanging out tonight with Caleb Maupin. We always have a fun time, plenty to talk about. Caleb, you notice I got on the shirt. Caleb gave me this shirt. It's great at one of his events, the Center for Political Innovation, and they're doing all kinds of good stuff. They've been doing a lot of work lately, pushing for some kind of a peace deal with North Korea. So Caleb's doing good work. Go to CPI USA. That's CPI USA to find out all the work that they're doing, and maybe you might be interested in being a part of it and learning what they're pushing. So, Caleb, a couple of things going on now. You know, I did name this why the sinking U.S. empire threatens Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Yemen. Okay, the economy has been. I had a friend of mine. Let me put it a different way. I had a friend of mine I was talking to, and they were like, "Oh, the Democrats, the Republicans, blah blah blah." And I brought up this point. I said, "Look, Reagan and Clinton's in for a while, Bush is in, or whoever the hell's in, Obama's in for a while." I said, "But you notice a pattern, and the pattern is this: the economic health of the average working class person has been deteriorating. I don't care which party's in, there's a steady deterioration. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And no matter, you can say you like this part or the other way, but the deterioration has been steady. And as deterioration seems to get steady, the U.S. ruling elite seem to be pushing more and more for conflict. You would think that they would turn inward and say, we got to fix what's going on here. But instead it's, no, we got to go over and punch those people. We got to hold, I call it the Tanya Harding. I can't beat Nancy Kerrigan at a skating event. So I'll take a lead pipe and I'll break her knees instead. What do you say to people that ask you, what the heck's going on? Why have we been having a constant economic deterioration for the last, whatever, I've been in maybe 40 years, 45 years since Reagan. What do you say to that? And what can we do, Caleb? How can we fix that? Why are we continually going down? What are the policies that are driving us down? What would your answer be, Caleb?
Well, I think you can look at something that was acknowledged by many of the popes, was acknowledged by Adam Smith, later was talked about by Karl Marx, which is that the source of pretty much all wealth is human labor power. Human labor power is the producer of wealth. If you're an employer, the way you're able to create value is by hiring workers and having those workers come together and produce products. And that human labor power is the source of all wealth. And we're living in a period where human labor power is less and less necessary because of technological advancement, which if we had a rational economy would be a great thing, would be great. Self-driving cars should be awesome. This job called driving shouldn't be necessary, right? The cars can drive themselves and all the human labor power can be expended elsewhere, but we live in a deeply irrational system. And we live in a system where self-driving cars, as has been pointed out by Andrew Yang, by the New York Times and others, would lead to riots in the streets. There'd be millions of truck drivers unemployed, millions of Uber drivers unemployed. There'd be, traffic courts would close down. It would be an economic nightmare because we've advanced technology, because we've gotten to a situation where we don't need driving anymore. This isn't rational. And this points to something that the system of production organized for profit, profits in command, has a problem that has never existed before in history. Until we had a system of production organized for profit, we never had the issue of poverty created by abundance. Whenever there was poverty before, it was caused by scarcity. People were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. People were hungry because there was a food shortage. But this system that we live under has a unique problem, which is people can become homeless because there are too many houses. People can become hungry because there is too much food. We have a situation, I don't know if you know about this. We're always talking about government waste and all of that. Well, look up the cheese cave in Springfield, Missouri. This is a little known fact about the United States of America, is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture buys billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese and buries it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri. Why? To keep the dairy prices high enough that all the farms don't go out of business. It's a subsidy because there's so much milk being produced that if the U.S. government weren't buying billions of dollars of cheese and burying it, the price of cheese and milk and dairy products would go so low the farms would collapse. This is the irrationality of a system where profit and the drive to maximize profit on the part of the employers defines production. And whenever you have a big technological leap in this system of production for profit, you tend to have a big economic fallout afterwards. I saw Andrew Yang, the founder of Alibaba, the brilliant CEO from China, saw him speak when I was in Russia a few years back. And one thing that he said is he pointed out that World War I came after a huge amount of great technological innovations. World War II came after the Great Depression, and the Great Depression came after a huge amount of technological innovations. And this irrational problem of poverty created by abundance, technological leaps leading to unemployment, it points to the need for a rationally planned economy. We need society as a whole to rationally organize production so that we don't have this issue. So as technology advances, as human labor becomes more productive, society gets wealthier in the process. We don't have that. We live under imperialism. I've started changing the way I talk about these things. I talk about globalism, imperialism, or imperialism, globalism. Because if you just say imperialism, people think you're a woke person and they think you're talking about, white people are the problem and it's about privilege or something like that. But if you just say globalism, people think you're a conspiracy theorist and you think it's the Illuminati and they're sacrificing babies and all of that. Well, it's neither of those things. It's a global economic system, globalism, imperialism, the rule of the planet by big banks and big monopolies based in Western countries. The ultra-rich, the World Economic Forum, the big four super major oil companies, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. You talk about the six families that have ruled America. At one point, they were talking about America's six families, sometimes America's 60 families. You talk about the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Vanderbilts. This is who rules the world. We're ruled by multinational corporations, big bankers and monopolies. And the way they keep their profit rolling in is by keeping the world poor, grinding countries into poverty, and making the world poorer and poorer and poorer so that they can reap in more profits. And that system, that's what, Vladimir Lenin, he wrote a book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And he described this, that capitalism had moved into this monopolistic stage. But Henry Charles Carey, who was an advisor to Abraham Lincoln, he wrote a book at the time of the American Civil War, and he talked about the English system of free trade versus the American system. And he talked about how the English British Empire, they were, dominating the world and impoverishing people. And in Russia and in China now, there's a rise in what they call geopolitical analysis, where they talk about the long-term history of civilizations. And they talk about Atlanticism and thalassocracy, empires of the sea. Versus talarocracy or Eurasianism and empires of the land, and how they have a different economic relationship with the countries they trade with. If you look at the great civilizations in China and Russia's history, or the Persian Empire of Iran, the way that they related on the land to these countries they were colonizing or taking over by building roads and connecting them was very different than how the Roman Empire operated. While they were building a gigantic empire and keeping people in poverty, or how the British Empire operated as they were emerging. And that land civilization versus sea civilization, you can talk about the English free trade system and the American School of Economics. You can talk about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. But we're all pointing to the same thing, which is the rule of the world by huge multinational corporations that are trying to maximize their profits. And they have this big problem, which is that human labor has become more productive than ever and is less and less necessary than ever. And the technology is creating more abundance than ever. And that leads to their system having a big crisis rooted in its own irrationality. So, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of understanding, but that's kind of where I'm at. I see imperialism, the Western financial order centered around Wall Street and London banks. I see that system as in complete free fall right now. And that's what's behind all these divisions among our elite. And that's why they're desperate to beat down the rising block of opposition. It's emerging because they don't have this problem. China doesn't have this problem. Russia doesn't have this problem. The African countries like that are raising themselves up. Burkina Faso is doing amazing stuff. Ibrahim Traore is just an amazing leader. And I mean, the countries that have broken out of this system don't have this problem. And so they're able to just keep going. And it's kind of a slow and steady wins the race. They're not getting to where the West is overnight, but they just kind of keep building and building and building while the West keeps crashing and burning because of the irrationality of the market.
You know, one of the things I think is interesting is China. What we were told is their system doesn't work. It can't work. It won't work, blah, 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 or it's oppressive and the people are all be oppressed and they'll have no rights. Now, US polls show that better than 90% of Chinese support their government. I don't call that a system that doesn't work. I don't care what you call their government. I don't care what the name of it. 90 to 90, and some polls show 95, 96, well over 90% of the people there are like, hey, our government's great, we like it. That doesn't sound like they're being oppressed, number one. Number two, well, their system doesn't work, except it does. They're blowing us away in everything. So it went from their system doesn't work, okay, and now they're blowing us away in technology in every possible way. And like basically we've got 90% of Americans don't like our government as opposed to 90% of theirs that don't. Their government is actually delivering. And the only thing our government says is they're bad or they're evil or they have no rights or freedoms, as we literally throw people out of the country for saying things that the government doesn't like, as we literally commit heinous acts and attack countries like the poorest country we can find, we got to go bomb them, and their system doesn't work. Your thoughts on China, what they're doing right, and why there's this irrational animosity towards China from the ruling elite in the US?
Well, first of all, anyone who tells you that China is an aggressor or China is a threat, let's break this down. Russia has 8 overseas military bases. China has 1 overseas military base. It's in the African country of Djibouti. The USA has at least 800 overseas military bases. Some people say it's closer to 1,000, depending on how you count them. So, who's the aggressor here? We're getting mad about China. Their military presence in the South China Sea is big, and it's like, wait a second, we're mad about what China's doing in the South China Sea. Is anyone mad about what we're doing in the Gulf of Mexico or the recently renamed Gulf of America? I mean, it's just absurd, right? But when we talk about China, we constantly hear these cliches. Well, first of all, kind of like you said, there's this old Cold War thinking, communism just doesn't work. No, communism just doesn't work. And then you point to people and you just point to the obvious thing, like China, right? 800 million people lifted out of poverty. They used to be one of the poorest countries in the world. Now they're the second largest economy in the world. The largest telecommunications manufacturer, makes phones that are way better than Apple. They're making half the steel on the planet. They're blowing the world away. The fastest trains, but communism doesn't work. And then you have people, they say, well, that's only because they became capitalist. That's just because they became capitalist. And it's like, wait a second. You're telling me that China, where the government owns and controls the banks, where the government has 5-year economic plans to plan out their economy, where they've got a Marxist-Leninist communist party running the country, where even the private companies that exist can't really do what they feel like doing. They're constantly being dictated and told what they have to do by the Communist Party. You're telling me that that's capitalism? But yet Obamacare is communism. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? I mean, and it just kind of shows you the way we put things. The argument that China is only having success because they're capitalist, that argument, that would be like saying, the other night it was really, really cool in my bedroom, right? It was cold. It was very cold in my bedroom. So I turned the heater on. And then it was more comfortable. So therefore, I should light my bedroom on fire because more heat is always the answer, right? Yes, China adjusted their system in the 1970s, and they needed to adjust their system. But the idea that they have a free market in China, that it is just, it's the kind of system we have where profits run everything in China, I mean, that's absurd. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is in control. They have power, and they do have a 5-year economic plan where they say, look, we need to eradicate poverty. We need to have growth in these sectors. And the state sits there and plans it. I remember when the U.S. economy crashed in 2008, right? The 2008 financial meltdown. China just kept going. I mean, they lost investment from other countries, but in terms of their economy, the government just stepped in and said, nope, we're going to do this. 2015, I will never forget. And I wrote an article about it at the time when I wrote it for RT.com, the collapse that never happened. China's stock market dropped by 60 points in one day. And everyone said, this is it. This is it. This is the end of China. Their stock market collapsed by 60 points in one day. And in America, if that happened, that would be like the end of civilization. There'd be riots in the streets. Food would stop getting delivered. The lights would go off all over the country. Like if our stock market went down, like their stock market went down, it would be a nightmare. China's stock market went down by 60 points. And you know what happened? Nothing, because most of China's economy has nothing to do with the stock market. And then it went down by 60 points. And so what did they do? The Chinese government called up everybody who was a shareholder, and they said, if you short sell, which is if you bet money that a stock is going to decrease, you're going to jail. We'll put you in jail if you short sell. And on top of that, they froze the selling of stocks on all government-owned industries. And then within a week, their stock market was even higher than it had been before it crashed. And everyone's like, how did that happen? Well, it happened because profits are not in command. That stock market exists. It's a vehicle for bringing in foreign investment. It's a place that people that are wealthier can throw their money around or whatever, but it doesn't really have the power. In America, the stock market rules. The government is just kind of a middleman facilitating the rule of the stock market. In China, the government rules, a government that comes out of an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial revolution. They rule. And they set up a stock market for their own convenience to bring in investors and it's worked out pretty well for them. But when that stock market fails, they just step in and take care of business. And, I've been hearing my whole life, China's going to fall. China's about to fall. They haven't fallen yet. They haven't fallen yet. Yes, according to the laws of the capitalist market, they should have fallen about 6 times by now. They don't play by those rules. And one thing that China does is they invest in their population. Right? Because as I said at the beginning, human labor power is the source of all wealth. And, the way Bernie Sanders talks about these things, right? I mean, the way American discourse, we talk about, in Europe, they have free healthcare, they have free college, and we talk about that like it's a giveaway, right? The right wing says, well, you got to work for things, don't be lazy and all of that. Don't want the government to take care of you. Left wing people, they point out, well, hey, the government, gives free money to corporations all the time. It gives handouts to rich people. Why shouldn't they give a handout to us? Well, they've got a fair argument, but that's not the way these things are discussed in China. The way China sees it is by giving people access to healthcare, by building universities and subsidizing students to go to them. They're investing in their population because they want to have a strong country. And to have a strong country, you need productive workers. And if you're going to have productive workers, they need to be healthy. And if you're going to have a strong country, you're going to need educated people, scientists, engineers, doctors, college professors, mathematicians. And so you're going to have to invest in educating those people so they can do that. And they don't see it as we're giving a handout, to people. They see it as investing in producing a productive economy because human labor is the basis of all wealth. We have an economy that is largely based on what they talk about fictitious capital. Right? Derivative ripoff schemes, Wall Street gambling casino. That's not where real wealth comes from. Real wealth comes from human labor power, human innovation and creativity. And China has invested in that. In America, we've utilized Cold War brain drain. Basically, we don't educate our population. We have one of the worst education systems in the Western world, with the worst scores in math, the worst scores in science. And that's okay because we'll just bring in people from India and Africa and Eastern Europe and all kinds of other countries. We'll bring them here and we'll have them do it. And that hurts those countries. The developing countries really need engineers and scientists and doctors and people like that to build up their countries. But if those folks can get their education there and then come to the United States where they can live a better life, then they're going to leave. So it's bad for those countries. And it's also bad for us Americans because our government's not investing in us. And, they have a supply of doctors and engineers and scientists coming from India and Nigeria and in Eastern Europe and places like that. And we're not getting better educated, and we're not, having a better workforce. So it's a lose-lose situation. The only people who win are the imperialists, the big monopoly corporations. And this started during the Cold War. And this is what that Berlin Wall was really about. That's what the Berlin Wall was really about. That's the dark secret no one wants to tell you, right? We're told the Berlin Wall was erected in East Germany. Why? Because communism is just so bad. Everyone wants to flee. So you have to build a giant wall to keep them in. That's not the truth. The Berlin Wall was built because at the time that, World War II had just happened, all kinds of people had died. Germany was completely destroyed. A lot of Europe was destroyed. And the Soviet Union was trying to help the countries that were aligned with them to rebuild. And most people were benefiting from this. They got a guaranteed job. They got guaranteed health care. But certain people, like engineers, like scientists, like college professors and others, they were not benefiting from it economically. And the USA went out of its way to lure those people to the West because they didn't want the Soviet Union to have those people. So basically, the way it was explained to me by an old communist, there was an old communist who said, it's a picket line. They set up a picket line through Germany. And that's basically what it was. You can't scab on the revolution, and that most people didn't want to leave. It was the engineers, the scientists, the doctors, people like that the USA was trying to basically have as scabs, pull them out of those countries so they would stay underdeveloped. And the Soviet Union said, no, you're not crossing the picket line. We need to raise our Eastern European countries up. And so you can't leave. And it was a picket line in the middle of Germany. Now, obviously, it was pretty brutal. And, I can understand why some people resent it. I'm not saying it was necessarily the right thing to do, but it was about dealing with this issue of brain drain, which in the long term has screwed the developing world. And it has screwed over Americans. So if you don't like the fact that we have a shitty educational system in America, if people in the colonized countries and developing countries of the world don't like the fact that they lose all their engineers and scientists, you really shouldn't be complaining about the Berlin Wall because it was an attempt to deal with that issue. Obviously, it didn't work, but that's where the Berlin Wall actually came from. Interesting fact.
It's a perfect example of the discussion that people are having about these, what are they, H-1B visas? That, okay, what does Silicon Valley do? The billionaires there don't want to pay their fair share of taxes and have decent schools here. So what do? We get people from India who were trained in high tech. Right. And so you were trained in high tech in India, and you can't make as much in India as you can here. So rather than have a decent STEM system here where we're pumping out engineers, we're pumping out software engineers, we're pumping out the technical people that we need. Instead, we let our system go to hell. OK, but we still need these STEM students. So guess what? We get them from India. We don't have to, I'm the billionaire. I don't have to pay any taxes here, so our schools are crap because they're not taking any money from me. Hey, who cares? B, I get to pay this guy cheaper. Who gets screwed? The American people get screwed ultimately because we still have those schools. But ultimately, you can only grab but so many of those people and bring them over. At some point, as India starts to build, which is doing, it starts to rise technologically, they start staying home because they can make a good living here, and this place starts falling to hell. Then who wants to come here as it deteriorates?
Right. And, when that whole H-1 visa debate was going on, I could hear both sides of it because, the whole situation where we're importing all of our educated and smart people from other countries is a disaster. But that said, if you just end it right now, we're pretty badly screwed. That wouldn't be good for our economy. We're going to have to transition. Ultimately, we need to start transitioning the United States toward not having this global situation. So I wasn't agreeing with the people that said, oh, we should just cut off all those visas.
We didn't have the people.
Realistic. Yeah,
we couldn't do it.
Yeah, but that's because we have a really shitty setup in this country that serves a global financial imperialist system. It doesn't serve the working people of this country or the working people of any other country. And that's where this problem came from. And we should just name that problem. And that there are a lot of things like that where it's like, I don't see eye to eye with the standard view of the left or the right. Immigration is one of them, right? For example, I think when Trump talks about how horrible these gangs are, MS-13 and Tran de Agua are from Venezuela, I couldn't agree more. Where did these gangs come from? What is it called? Aguila or whatever. That group was funded by the American government to fight Maduro. They've been using them to fight the Venezuelan government for a long time. And that's why they all got visas to come to the United States, is they were anti-Maduro people, and they were all getting asylum. I'm being oppressed by dictator Maduro. I mean, this is an anti-communist death squad, basically, a brutal gang. And, you know, these other groups, where did all the drug cartels that have infested Central America come from? That was the Contra War in Nicaragua, where we were arming all these anti-communist groups that were running cocaine, etc. And so, yeah, those groups are very, very awful. And, you know, and people in the Latin American community will tell you that. This notion that it's all just racist to say the narcos are bad. No, it is not. They are bad folks. That said, what Trump is doing right now is not really hurting them in any way. Because at the end of the day, if you want to make sure that those groups really flourish, make sure that immigrant communities are afraid to call the police. Make it so immigrant people are afraid to call the police, and, you know, because they don't want to get deported. And then those groups are going to have more of a free hand. Create a situation where people can't legally come into the United States. Then how are they going to get into the United States? They're going to get smuggled by one of those gangs. Right. And when you create a crackdown, that is what allows these groups to flourish. So I don't agree with the right wing, but we need to talk about where these problems came from. I also, though, don't agree with the left wing, because they point at the situation. They're like, oh, this is the American dream. It's like, no, this is a nightmare. What has been done to South and Central America? You know, they find dead bodies every day along the border with Mexico. Every day they find dead bodies. That is not a good situation. That's not the American dream. That's a nightmare. The fact that people can't live in their own country, the fact there's big sections of Honduras that don't have running water and don't have electricity in the 21st century, where people don't even speak Spanish, they speak indigenous languages, no access to education. I mean, this is a nightmare, right? And it's because of this global financial system of imperialism that grinds countries into poverty, that this nightmare exists. So we can't just pretend there's no problem, which is what the liberals want to do. And we can't just celebrate the crisis of mass migration like it's somehow a good thing. But the other thing, we're not going to solve it by just having, you know, raids and crackdowns. And, you know, everything that is a problem that flows from the mass migration crisis is going to get worse with these ICE raids. For example, right? What is one of the big problems with mass migration? Is immigrants work for less pay than people with papers do. Well, does that get better if they're all terrified of being deported? Absolutely not. You know, U.S. law says you have to pay everybody minimum wage. Doesn't matter if they have papers or whatever. But is any undocumented worker going to tell on their employer and demand a decent wage if they're terrified of getting deported? Of course not. Right. You know, so, I mean, it's, you know, the solutions that I'm hearing from conservatives to deal with a crisis that they acknowledge are not real solutions. So, and I also hear conservatives, they just want to gloss over the fact that this is an anti-communist, anti-Maduro gang. Why doesn't anyone bring that up? They make it sound like Maduro sent these people here or something. I mean, it's like Maduro had these people in prison. They started in the prisons, you know, where they were drug dealers and anti-communist thugs and others who'd been in prison, and they started this gang, and then the USA brought them in, rewarded them with visas. So how are you blaming Maduro for the evil things that this gang does? If anything, we should be blaming the CIA. And I will say this, when Trump designated MS-13 and the gang from Venezuela, I always mispronounce their name, when he designated them as terrorists, I don't agree with that, because I don't agree with the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. I think that law is unconstitutional, doesn't make clear what support for a terrorist group is. But then I saw the New York Times and all these mainstream media outlets get really upset that Donald Trump did that. And I started reading those articles, and I saw what was going on there. And we've been using those groups to fight against Maduro. And now it's way harder to have the CIA give people guns and all of that if they're designated as terrorists. That's what they were mad about, right? That's what you read it. It was very careful. It says it was part of police operations. Sometimes you have to aid these people, and in different places it makes it harder for us to compromise. We've been bribing these people to fight Maduro, and Trump made it a lot more difficult by designating them as terrorists. So in a way, I can appreciate Trump doing that. And that's kind of like Tulsi Gabbard getting angry about the USA funding Islamic extremists around the world. It's a similar thing. There's an understanding that if we keep giving guns and weapons to really nasty folks, they'll turn around and hurt us. And it's the same in the Middle East with the Islamic extremists we've been arming. And it's the same in Latin America with the drug dealers we've been arming. So I understand why there's been a shift. And that's what makes me think that there could be some improvement from the Trump administration. We're just going to have to see. But behind there's a real debate here. And neither the left nor the right wants to talk about the real controversy going on.
Let me ask you this. The deterioration or the lack of democracy or the downright animosity towards democratic principles in Europe now. We saw what happened with Marine Le Pen. I'm not saying I align with her policies, because I don't. I'm not saying that I even think that she's not guilty. I don't know if she is or not. I haven't seen the evidence. Knowing the level of corruption, particularly in France, it wouldn't shock me. However, the motivation clearly was because she was going to probably win, and they couldn't have that. And all you have to do is look at them filling poor old Robert Fico full of holes and try to do him in. Certainly, aiming recently, I think Merz, the guy who's in charge of Germany, said something about, yes, we've got to focus on our enemies in the EU. In other words, they're simply saying, look, we've had enough of this illusion of democracy. What's interesting is this. We're told that China and Russia are oppressing their people and their dictatorships. If you look at Russia, 87% of the people support their president. If you look at China and Russia, they seem to be politically stable. They're economically growing, right? They're politically stable, economically stable, culturally stable, very stable culturally. They know who they are. The Russians are like, hey, we're Orthodox Christians. That's who we are. This is what we believe. This is what we do. But we're good with it, right? Okay. The unstable places, politically unstable, economically unstable, Europe, you couldn't get more politically, economically unstable. And they're the ones threatening Russia and China, saying they're dictators and they're aggressive. And it's this weird irony, hypocrisy of the economically, culturally degenerates in Europe, the leader. Now, I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the ruling elite, saying that the people who have their country stable are the bad guys that have to be dealt with. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I spent, most of my adult life studying Marxism and communism. But as I started traveling, and I went to Iran and I went to Russia and I went to different countries, I learned that you can pull things from different schools of thought, right? And when we think about, the leader of Russia, who I've met on a number of occasions, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and I think about Xi Jinping in China, I think about the supreme leader of Iran, who I never met. I was in an audience with him. I was about 100 feet away from him. I saw him, Ali Syed Khamenei. And I think about that, and we have to understand, there's a book that was a very conservative right-wing book that came out before World War I by Oswald Spengler, and it was called The Decline of the West. And in that book, Oswald Spengler, who was a conservative traditionalist in Europe, he talked about what is the leader of the nation, right? What is the leader of a country? And he talked about how in the West, in the name of democracy, we have these elections where we have, 2 candidates or 3 candidates or how many ever candidates. In America, it's just 2, but other places it's more than that. And they're all trying to get the approval of the people, trying to get the people to like them. And they throw mud at each other, and they make a lot of promises they're not going to keep. And it's a big dog and pony show, and they're all trying to get our votes. However, for most of human civilization, what the head of state or the leader has been the opposite. The people are the ones working really, really hard to win the approval of the leader, right? You think about, it's almost like, like the leader is like the father of the country, and it's like the child really wants the father to be proud of them. So they go out and they do great things because they want the father to love them, right? And that we have gotten so far away from that. There were elements of that in America, right? There's an old, if you watch old movies from the Roosevelt years during World War II, often they wouldn't show Roosevelt's face because it was like offensive to have someone play Roosevelt because he was sacred, right? And that, it was common, for families at one point to have, a picture of Roosevelt and a picture of Abraham Lincoln in the household. Like they were the two great leaders of the country. And there was a time where, every parent would tell their kid, I'd like you to grow up to be just like the commander in chief of the country. The president he played kind of a sacred role. In addition to whatever political party he was in, he was also the leader that we all kind of looked up to. He was the father of the country. We've gotten so far past that. Whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, I really doubt there's many people that are saying to their kids, I want you to grow up and be just like Donald Trump, right? I want you to grow up and Stormy Daniels and, come on now, right? I mean, we're so far away from that. And what Oswald Spengler was pointing to is that in the West, the relationship should go both ways. The people should be trying to please the leader, but the leader should also be trying to please the people. It should be like kind of a back and forth. It should go both ways. And we've gotten to the point that politics has just turned into kind of a dog and pony show, where at the end of the day, we don't really get things. And when I go to Russia and when I read the writings of Xi Jinping, which you can buy them, by the way, did you know that? I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but Xi Jinping, he's got multiple volumes of The Governance of China by Xi Jinping. This is all of his speeches. You can go buy them at Barnes and Noble. You can read from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what Xi Jinping believes. They're doing something called statecraft, right? Which is that they view running the government like, a doctor who treats illnesses. That is his job. He goes to medical school for years. He works with many different patients, and he knows the art of taking care of his patient. They view being the leader of a country like being a doctor, right? It is a job that you learn. And I know Xi Jinping, he was in local government first, and he proved himself in local government. He was the mayor of a rural village, and he actually studied in Iowa. Did you know this? He actually studied in Muscatine, Iowa, in the 1980s. He was the mayor of a village, and he went to Iowa, and he slept in a farmhouse in Iowa for a few days, and he studied agricultural techniques at a farm in Iowa. And the house that he lived in, they've built a replica of it in China, including the Star Trek wallpaper that the teenage boy had in the bedroom and everything. And people pay money to go into the replica of the farmhouse Xi Jinping slept in Iowa. But, Xi Jinping, he was in local government, and he did a really good job. He doubled the income of everyone in the village. So then he moved up to regional leadership, and that's how he moved up the ranks, as he was an effective leader who could reach certain goals. He could deliver the goods. He could improve people's lives economically, and he learned the art of running the government on a local level, on a state level, and now he's the leader of the country. He's the big boss, Xi Jinping. Because it's an art, right? And that, in the old kind of Soviet-style communist way of doing things, the Communist Party, that's the ruling party, not everybody joins it. You join it if you want to be a political leader, right? If you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school. If you want to be a soldier, you go into the military. If you want to be a bricklayer, you go and, have an apprenticeship with a bricklayer. If you want to be in politics, you join the young everyone's in the Young Pioneers Club, which is like the Boy Scouts or whatever. But then once you get to high school, it's optional. Most people don't join the Young Communist League, the youth organization. That's high school, college age. And if you want to be in politics, you join the Young Communist League. And then if you're still involved in that and you want to be like a government official, then, in your late 20s, you join the Communist Party. And it's a very specific thing. It's you want to do this certain job. It's not about what you believe, because that's the ruling ideology. Everyone's supposed to believe that, right? It's about if you want to take on a certain job, you join the Communist Party, and we teach you the art of statecraft. And it is actually much more like what Oswald Spengler was talking about in his Decline of the West. It's much more of like the people in government are serving a purpose. They have like a traditional role in leading the nation. It's very different than the way we see politics in the West. In the West, we kind of have this feeling that the government is best that governs least, right? We kind of just want the government to just step back. And there's a feeling in the East, especially, that the government has a job to do. They have to deliver the goods or they're out of there. And the reason that Putin is so wildly popular is they were in a nightmare at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, and he fixed it. And he really improved things. And he centered the economy around state-controlled oil and gas revenue. And with Gazprom and Rosneft, they were selling oil and gas on the international markets. Then Bush invaded Iraq and drove the oil prices up by blowing up Iraq. An oil-producing country was destroyed. We had like $120 a barrel, the highest oil prices in history. Russia had a huge amount of money. Putin used that money to rebuild their industries, and he launched the Priorities of Life program, which was about improving housing conditions, etc. And like during Putin's first term in office, the wages of your typical Russian person tripled. Now, there was a lot of inflation, so it's not exactly like you were making 3 times what you made. That's still pretty dramatic, right? Inflation, but I mean, can you imagine your income multiplying by 3? That's what Putin delivered in his first term. That is really, really effective government leadership. And he did it with state management of the economy. And Russia has been rising and rising and rising ever since. In 2014, Russia, they couldn't import any agricultural products from Europe. They couldn't get baby food from Europe. They couldn't import things. So what did the Russian government do? They had a farming boom. And now Russia is having some of the biggest harvests in the world. And they created a state program where they loan people money to go start their own farms. And now they've turned Russia into an agricultural superpower. It's amazing what they've done. And he said, okay, they're not going to let us import farm products. We're just going to grow our own farm products. And the climate in Russia has gotten, because of global warming, I guess, has gotten to be a little bit more friendly to agriculture, right? And during the time of the Soviet Union, they had like virgin land campaigns where they were trying to expand, but now they're able to farm in areas they weren't always able to farm. And so Russia's having a farming boom now. And there's state management of the economy, very big private sector. But there's a lot of state management, and with the state having all this money coming in from oil and gas revenue and then subsidizing industries, they've been able to rebuild things. And so statecraft, the idea that the government has an obligation to serve the people and should be making the population better. I tell people, we're always told the market solves everything. Did the market bring us Bach and Beethoven's music? No. Did the market paint the Sistine Chapel? No, that was government. And there were governments in Europe at the time of the Enlightenment who said, look, we've got a duty. We want to make our people smarter. We want to make our people better. And so they found artists, musicians, painters, and others, and said, go out and make art that will make people better. And that's very different. In the West now, art is all commercial. Right? It's what will sell the most. That's why Hollywood makes the same movie over and over and over again. And it's not about making us better. It's about lowering things down to the most common denominator to make sure they get a return on their investment. All of this calls a lot of things into question, and it also transcends left and right, right? I mean, I tell people, when people talk about Alexander Dugin, the important Russian philosopher and the fourth political theory, he's saying, look, we're not left, we're not right, we're doing something different here. We have a different way of doing things, but you in the West, you believe in liberalism, not, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, but the philosophy of liberalism that says individual above all else. And in the East, they don't have as much of a liberal perspective. And, in the West, we have economic liberalism, which is conservatives, the free market. You're on your own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But we also have social liberalism, which is you have no obligation to your family. You have no obligation to your country. Just live, do whatever you want to do, use drugs, whatever, you just be an individual, whatever. And in the East, there's very much a sense of collectivism. Duty to one's nation, duty to one's family, but also economic, people are cared for, people are taken care of. We're all in this together. We're going to build up the economy together. And that the East is much more collective, and their collectivism transcends left and right. And as the West is having all the problems that we're having now, the East is increasingly looking to their collectivist roots and kind of developing in new, interesting ways.
Interesting. You mentioned Hollywood. I'd like to get your thoughts on the identity politics. People will talk about, they use the term woke, but it is now, it's just sickening to me. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know why, but this aggravates me. I turn on the TV and every single show, every single advertisement, there's one Black person, one white person, one Indian person, one gay person, you know what I mean? Rather than have a movie where literally someone will go to another planet on this movie, and they'll land on a planet and there'll be a group of people. And within that group of people on another planet, 100 million light years away, there's one Black person, one Asian. And I'm like, how did the people 100 million light years away get the idea that they're supposed to do things just like here? It doesn't make sense. the identity politics, to me, there's a certain evil to it. It really is. Because to me, what you're really now saying is, I only see this group of actors based on their race. You know what I mean? I only really see them. Okay, let's set up for the movie. We got to have 4 people who are going to be the stars. One of them has to be a woman. One of them has to be a gay person. One of them has to be a Latino. One of them has to be a black. One of them has to, oh, we need a black female. We don't have a black female. So there's no, hey, let's see who's really a great actor or actress. Let's do this or that. They even do that with the writers. And then it ends up being a crappy movie. And to me, identity politics, it just feels horrible that there's an evil to it that replaces something real with something that looks like it's real, but it's very, very fake. Anyway, your thoughts on identity politics?
Well, it's interesting. It cheapens everything, right? They made the all-women version of Ghostbusters, and it was like a gimmick almost, and it's kind of it has a fake quality to it, right? Where we're checking off the boxes, right? We're not coming up with a good story. We're just checking off the boxes. We're going to get our diversity points or whatever. It's interesting because there's a type of like low budget movie that they made in the 70s. They used to call them black exploitation films. Like Foxy Brown, I think, was like a woman who was like a police officer or like a superhero. Right. And there was Shaft and the
Superfly and stuff like all of that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Well, those films, they were very much aimed at a black audience and all of that, but they tended to have somewhat of a socially conscious message. They tended to talk about racism. They weren't just checking off the boxes. They were obviously very much aimed at one particular community. They were, I guess you might say, pandering, but there was politics involved. It wasn't just checking off the boxes. There's one movie from those years that is actually, it's pretty wild. They made the movie, I think in 1970, maybe 1971, and then they would not release it. For years, they wouldn't release it because they thought it was a threat to national security. I don't know if you ever heard of it, The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Yes.
Yeah, and that movie is about like a black CIA agent who becomes a revolutionary, basically. And they like suppressed that film for years. They thought it would inspire, terrorism or insurrection against the American government and stuff. And people like to ridicule those movies, but compared to what they do now, it's weird how these things work. And I will say that, Hollywood is a tool of imperialism, right? I go to the movies, and, I go to the movies and I always think while I'm there, I was told years ago, bring your class glasses to the movies. And there was a communist group that I knew of that was very, very stoic in the way they operated. To be in this communist group, you had to have a specific job in a specific industry, and you worked, you worked in the industry, and and then you sold, communist literature to your coworkers, and then you had your party meeting on Saturday, and then on Sunday, you and your comrades went to the movies so you could talk about the movies with your coworkers. And you watched the movie and you gave a political analysis, an understanding of the movie from the Marxist-Leninist perspective, right? Some of these groups were very, very, very extreme, I guess, in the way they viewed things. But, I was always taught to, bring my class glasses to the movie, to view the movie in a very, and what are they saying? And to also point out that, it can be a good movie and be wrong. Right. Because I've had people, I'll politically critique their movie. They get very defensive. I'm like, it's a good movie. It's just the message that it's putting out is not necessarily a good one, and I try to think about it that way. And that you'll notice that one thing that we are obsessed with, Hollywood is obsessed with this. It's like an obsession. Dystopias. They always want to create a dystopia, some dark, sinister future. And that is such a fixation. Every science fiction movie, they've always got a dystopia they want to sell us. And that is something that I think is rather unhealthy. We're always looking for some dark dystopia, and that you can see that over and over again. The other thing is that there is kind of a view of people as being negative. People overall as just being bad. Human beings are bad deep down. We're our own worst enemies and all that. And that's a really common theme. in Hollywood as well. And Hollywood has evolved and adapted. I always tell people, if you want to know how much American society is founded in racism, look at the fact that the first of every movie in Hollywood is a racist one. What was the first full-length movie? It was The Birth of a Nation, right? And what was the first talking movie? It was The Jazz Singer, which is also a pretty racist movie. And what was the first cartoon? It was Steamboat Willie, which is also pretty racist. It was a Disney cartoon. It's like every first in Hollywood was racist if you look at it. But at the same time, Hollywood, it's always kind of pushing the envelope, right? Because, Hollywood wants to sell tickets, and a good way to sell tickets is to, push the envelope a little bit, make people a little bit uncomfortable. So Hollywood is very liberal in a social sense, right? It very much, likes to push the envelope of, sexual innuendo and drugs and things like that. But Hollywood is also very wealth focused and very much worshiping money, and that it's subtly been saying to people around the world, America is this paradise of wealth. Our streets are paved with iPods. We've got so much wealth here. American media goes all over the world. And when I started traveling to anti-imperialist countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua and Iran and all of that, I realized how damaging a lot of the reality TV is, like Real Housewives of New Jersey, for example, right? Most people don't live like that in America, right? I mean, that's that, but those shows get broadcast into those countries with translation, with audio, and people really believe that we're all, living this huge luxury, life of wealth. And that is very, very effective propaganda. People believe the United States is just a paradise. When I go overseas, I tell people, if you watch American media, 90% of the time you are seeing New York City or Southern California. And America is way bigger than that. And there's a lot of America that you are never going to see in Hollywood movies. And there's a lot of America that they don't want you to see in Hollywood movies, right? We might, they might, show, gangs or criminal stuff in Hollywood movies in a way that they can like romanticize it. But there's a real, ugly reality to U.S. society: opioid addiction, crumbling infrastructure. There's all kinds of ugly realities that they have just kind of obscured in Hollywood. And there's big sections of the country that just don't exist. If you watched Hollywood, you'd have to wonder, how did Donald Trump get elected? Right? The America that you see in Hollywood movies, the America you see on reality television, they didn't vote for Trump. Somebody did. Yeah, somebody did. And it's the America that you never get to see, that Hollywood and American television and satellite TV is never going to show you. That's who voted for Trump. So there you go. I have a lot to say on that, as you heard.
Well, the other thing I've noticed is the clandestine complete shift of Hollywood to the national security state. And it's very clandestine, and it's everywhere. I first started noticing, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was when they did a remake of Red Dawn. And when I learned about the first Red Dawn, and I'm like, Red Dawn, so we're being invaded from people. They were the Russians, they were the Nicaraguans, and the Libyans. Remember that? They had soldiers from Nicaragua and Libya. It was like a list of countries that Reagan and the CIA were after, that saw as adversaries, were all put together in a group, and they were supposedly invading the United States. They came all the way across the country, and they came up through Nicaragua to get us, right? Okay. Then they redid Red Dawn in like 2011 or 13. It was the North Koreans invaded Washington State. How the hell did they get here? They don't have a navy that can really cross the ocean. They must have flew in commercial jetliners, but for some reason, the North Koreans decided to invade Washington State. Now, let me give you another example of the clandestine. The Avengers. Oh, everybody loves the Avengers, right? What a great movie, The Avengers. Tony Stark is what? He's a defense contractor. Captain America is what? Special forces. The guy with the bow, and the other lady who's a red whatever, CIA spies, right? If you look at it, even Bruce Banner, what is he? He is a bio research engineer. He probably created COVID or something, in one of these. So if you look at him, it's like, oh boy, we're saved. A defense contractor, a special forces guy, a couple of spies, and a bioengineering research guy who's doing, creating killer viruses, for God's sake, whatever. And whatever it was, it got loose and turned him into the Hulk. He's literally a lab leak. And these guys come together and, oh boy, they're going to save us from whoever the hell, whatever, from someone. And I'm like, if you really think about like the people they give us as superheroes, whatever the case, they're always like, I'm looking and I'm like, why didn't they just add a Pentagon lobbyist? That's the only thing they left out. To lead of them all, I guess we needed a Pentagon lobbyist. And might I add, they're all a member of Samuel L. Jackson runs like some clandestine CIA operation who has unbelievable technology, effectively flying, what would you call them? Like gigantic ships, you know what I mean? Flying aircraft carriers effectively, right? And I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's the national security state. And they're like clandestinely training us to love and expect the national security state. What are they doing? They're protecting us. And that's Hollywood.
Well, you know, Red Dawn. So I first heard about the movie Red Dawn when Timothy McVeigh got the death penalty, because they mentioned that was his favorite movie. I guess Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, he was in a militia group and, you know, he like fantasized he was going to fight.
If that guy wasn't an FBI, CIA operative, I've never seen one. You know, I've heard a lot of people very suspicious about his background.
Yeah. But you know, I had never seen it. And when I was in college, I heard there was this anti-communist movie from the 80s. And I started trying to watch it. I couldn't finish it. It was just so boring. I mean, it was just so bad, right? And I just remember the part where they arrest the father of one of the kids.
What was the name of the movie again?
Red Dawn.
Yes. Oh, yeah, God.
The father of one of the kids is behind a fence and they're showing him like communist propaganda on the scrin, and he's behind the fence and he says to the son, "Avenge me! Yeah. Avenge me!" It was just so hokey. But long story short, you know, 2012, I'm a communist activist in New York City, and they make a new movie of Red Dawn. It's originally going to be about China invading the United States, right? And they film it as if it's going to be about China invading the United States. And I actually knew people that were in Detroit, and they were walking down the street, and all of a sudden they see all these people in People's Liberation Army Chinese military uniforms. Like, what's going on here? Well, they're filming Red Dawn in Detroit, and the movie comes, but then they realize that they can't sell the movie in China if it's about China invading the United States. So they edited the movie. They used like graphic editing, and they changed all the Chinese writing on the tanks and all that to be North Korean writing. And they made it about North Korea invading the United States instead of about China invading the United States, which is just like, that's classic. So then the day the movie came out, we had a protest against the movie. And we went to the movie theater. We had about 15 people. We protested the movie, and we got big North Korean flags, and we went into the movie theater. It was around the time of Occupy Wall Street. So they had the mic check where you like repeat after yourself. So we went into the movie theater. Red Dawn is lying war propaganda. You know, we did a whole thing. And so I made a YouTube video of it. National Review magazine picked it up and ran an article, Occupy Wall Street supports North Korea. And so they published it. And long story short, when I went to Ecuador for the World Communist Youth Festival the next year, the North Koreans were there, and they recognized me, and they said, we saw that was all over television in North Korea. So apparently, you know, me and 15 of my friends, we protested Red Dawn, and it you know, the North Koreans had seen it. So you know, there you go. But that shows you how important what we're doing in the United States really is, right? You know, that's what that showed me. And that also sometimes protesting a movie, you'd think that's just kind of a silly gimmick, but actually it's important because those movies are, you know, really, really effective propaganda. You know, I mean, a lot of Americans, what they know about North Korea is what they saw in Olympus Has Fallen, or what was the one, they made a movie where they assassinated the leader of North Korea.
Yeah,
right?
Some stupid comedy.
Right. And, you know, so, you know, it shows that, you know, me and 15 of my friends protesting outside the movie theater in Times Square, it was heard all around the world. And the fact that National Review did something on it, and that, you know, one thing led to another, and it had a pretty substantial impact. You know, and even now, years later, I'll meet somebody and they'll say, "Were you the guy that did the protest against the movie?" You know, it's like, it's just a thing, you know, and it shows that with a small group of people, you can make a difference. That's why, you know, we were outside Madison Square Garden when Donald Trump was having the rally right before the end of the presidential campaign with our big banner, "Only Peace Can Make America Great Again," with Trump and Kim shaking hands. I'm headed to Chicago in a couple days. We're going to be there with our banner once again. Trump apparently has said he does want, and there is some talk of, renewing U.S. North Korea talks happening. I also heard that the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, one of Putin's economic advisors, is headed to Washington, D.C. Pretty soon. That's kind of a surprise. And so I can only hope that negotiations can move ahead. This Ukraine war needs to end. We're going back and forth, and it worries me, honestly. I would like to see this Ukraine war end. And what you said about Marine Le Pen and all of that, yeah, they're blocking her out of the election because she wants peace with Russia, just like the Romanian leader, just like the shooting of Fisco. And I mean, these are dangerous times that we're in. Humanity wants peace. I mean, it's not just that in Russia and China, their governments have massive support, but in Europe, the overwhelming majority of people don't want to have a war with Russia. Here in America, the overwhelming majority of people don't want war. They want peace. That's why they voted for Trump. What the imperialists are trying to do to save their system is wildly unpopular. And so they've already given up on trying to convince people that their system is doing well. They're just trying to scramble and confuse the opposition. That's what they're doing right now. And I've compared it before to the years of lead in Italy, where the population was against NATO, wanted to leave NATO. And so they started manipulating the opposition and having the different communist groups fight each other and having the fascist groups fight the communists. And the years of lead, all of that led to a situation where there was so much confusion among the opposition. Even though the Italian public wanted to leave NATO, Italy stayed in NATO. And I feel like that's the operation they're running here. They've given up trying to convince people that things are good. They just want to scramble and confuse the opposition. And that's why I'm telling people we got to do it in real life. Get off the internet. The internet is rigged. The internet is fake. Listen to us now, but we need you to get involved in real life. That's why we're having a convention this summer, July 12th. In Chicago. Garland's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Scott Ritter. It's going to be awesome. We are planning to have the biggest event the Center for Political Innovation has ever done. We are going to get 400 people into the Midwest Convention Center near Chicago O'Hare Airport. I'm headed there this weekend to kind of get the outreach going. I've got a lot of meetings with different people from different communities that are getting involved. This is going to be a big event that we're doing because we need to bring people together. The internet is very good at getting people very narrowed down into a specific niche and arguing over minutia and all that. But we need to get people to come together around what we can agree on and build a genuine solid block of anti-imperialism in this country. And I think we can do it. I really do think we can do it. It's going to require being strong. It's going to require looking past a lot of their psychological operations. That's why the Center for Political Innovation exists. And we have been able to impact the political conversation in a pretty massive way with the little resources and little membership that we've got. So I am convinced that we can just keep building. And I'm very excited. It feels good at the end of the day when you can say, you know what, we made a difference. We made a difference in our own way. We changed the conversation. We changed the discourse. I've got this book, about Yemen and stuff like that. Not saying too much about it, but, I got this book. We're printing thousands of copies of this for distribution in the Chicago area with the poster for the convention on the back. And I'm going to pick those up from the printer tomorrow. And that's very exciting. And we got posters that are hitting the college campuses, and we got door knocker flyers that are going on doors. And we're between now, April, May, June, we are going to do a huge amount of outreach in the Chicago area to have a really powerful anti-imperialist rally. People are coming in from Australia. People are coming in from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. I'm pretty pumped about it. And you'll be there. You've got your CPI shirt on, and I'm looking forward to what you'll have to say to the crowd. I'm also looking forward to the music that's going to be played and all of that. We are doing something really unique. We are innovating. We are pioneers. I tell people, everyone knows from 60s rock and roll, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. There's a band called the Velvet Underground. Have you ever heard of the Velvet Underground? That was Lou Reed. Lou Reed and Nico and some others. They had a band called the Velvet Underground. And the Velvet Underground, they never sold anywhere near as many albums as the Beatles or the Rolling Stones did. But they were pioneers. They did things that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones couldn't do. Right? They took risks. They were kind of an underground band. I think they were subsidized by Andy Warhol, the art, designer. And, they said that, they didn't sell that many albums, but everyone who bought their albums was somebody who started a band, right? They were like musicians, and they experimented and they pushed the envelope and they really, changed the course of rock music. I feel like that's the role the Center for Political Innovation plays. We are the velvet underground. We are the vanguard of American politics. We say something, and that opens the door for other people to say it. We throw ideas out there, and that creates a moment where those ideas are floating around and other people can pick them up. And we are always 2-3 years ahead. I mean, I'll just say that. We're always 2 or 3 years ahead, and that's a good sign. And we have our feet to the ground, and we understand what works. And so we just got to keep innovating and pioneering. And I am confident that, years from now, already people are looking back on stuff we did 2-3 years ago, stuff we did 4 years ago, and they're like, damn, they were ahead of the game. Well, we are ahead of the game, but we got to keep ahead of the game, and we got to just keep innovating and keep pioneering. So that's why we exist, Center for Political Innovation. You can check us out. cpiusa.org is our website. We got all kinds of new texts, and we're doing some exciting stuff. So get involved. That's what I got to say. Get involved. You're not meant to do this alone. Somebody that I talked to, one of our members out in Minneapolis, was saying to me, it's so demoralizing when you're on your own. You hear about what's happening in Gaza. You hear about everything that's happening. It just frustrates you. And if you're not part of a community that's actively trying to change things, knowing this stuff can just eat you alive. It's just too much to handle. But if you're with other people and you're pushing back and you're trying to change things, it can actually have the opposite effect. You can feel like you're part of something very, very special. You're on the side of right. So you need to be in a community. If you know this stuff, if you've been cursed with the knowledge of what's going on in the world, and you know how bad things are, you need to get involved in pushing back against it. It's really the only way you can really, really feel good about this. I just wanted to throw that out there. So there you go.
All right, thanks a lot, Caleb Maupin. CPI USA is the website to check out Caleb's good work, and I always enjoy it. And Caleb does have a YouTube. Are you also on Rumble?
I am on Rumble. And I've got books, and the Center for Political Innovation, and I'm streaming, and I'm doing great stuff. And it's really always a pleasure to come on, Garland. Thank you for the invitation. We always have a great back and forth. So
yeah, but it's fun. We just kind of get on and hang out with all of our friends in the chat, and always get an opportunity to go, like take a movie apart, like Avengers or something. It's funny, all of those movies, when you like take them apart, it's like you were saying, when you take them apart, it's like all propaganda. You know what I mean? So it's always the same thing. But we need these kind of discussions so we can open people's eyes to what's going on, and just kind of hang out and have a good time and have fun too. That's important. I've been around the CPI USA people. People are hanging around, they're eating, they have music, they're singing, it's camaraderie. All right, thanks a lot, Caleb. Everybody, make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rumble, follow me on Rockfin, follow me here, and subscribe everywhere. And if you can afford to join, there's a little join button. You can click join, and of course, don't forget Caleb's channel. He's on regularly doing good stuff. Follow him and follow him on Rumble. We're out.